Continuing lesson 6.3 on our big and small percents. Look at the do you know how, page 350, number 5. So write each percent as a fraction and as a decimal. So like I've said, I would recommend changing to a decimal first, is just moving your decimal point 2 spots. So that's 1 and 50 hundredths, or just 1 and 5 tenths. If you go with the 1 and 5 tenths, it actually is going to make things a little bit simpler for you as far as your fraction part, maybe, because then our fraction we can write as 1 and 5 tenths, and then we can just reduce that down, reduces to 1.5. So that's a big percent. Now let's look on number 6. We've got a small percent, 3/10 of a percent. 3/10 of a percent. What we could do is write that as 3/10 of a percent. And then again, if you want to, we can change that to a decimal first. So that would just be moving the decimal 2 places to the left. We can add a 0 here. And so then our decimal would be 3 thousandths, or if you want, you can put a 0 in front of that, 0 and 3 thousandths. So that's the decimal. Then the only other part to do is the fraction. So our fraction is just going to be the same, at least to start out. 3 thousandths as a decimal is 3 thousandths as a fraction. That cannot be reduced, so we're done. And that's why I like doing the decimal first and then the fraction. It kind of leads its way into the fraction and maybe creates a little less work for you. So we look at number 7. Again, this is a small percent. This one's already written with the decimal. We still have to find the decimal, but it's not a fraction of a percent like the last one was. So if we go ahead and change this to a decimal, is moving the decimal 2 places to the left. And so that would be 24 10 thousandths, tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10 thousandths. That's our decimal. And then for our fraction, so the fraction for this would be 24 10 thousandths, and then we can reduce. If nothing else, maybe you notice both of these are even, so you can divide by 2. That'd be 12 over 5,000. Those are still both even, so you can divide by 2 again. Would be 6 over 2,500. Those are still even. Divide by 2 would be 3 over 1,250. At that point, we can't reduce anymore, so that would be our fraction. So look at number 8. Kelly saved 4/5 of a percent of her allowance. What is this percent expressed as a fraction and as a decimal? So 4/5 of a percent, if you take 4 divided by 5, 5 doesn't go into 4. 5 goes into 40 8 times. So this would be 8/10 of a percent, or 0.8%. So that's going to get us close, where if we move our decimal 2 places, we can get our decimal, which would be, this would be our decimal then, 8 thousandths. And then that means our fraction would be 8 thousandths. So reducing this, if we reduce both of those by 2, that's 4 over 500. And then reduce by 2 again would be 2 over 250. If you see to do it, you could have divided by 4 and gone straight to the 2 over 250 would work also. And actually, it's just been pointed out to me, this can still be reduced. I was not thinking correctly. These are still both even. Divide by 2 again would be 1 over 125. So you actually, if you see it, both of those actually could have been divided by 8 to begin with. I'm guessing most people probably wouldn't notice that. So, but final would be 1 over 125 for your fraction. And then number 9, just to get practice with one more big percent, we have 250%. If you wanted to just move that decimal 2 places to the left, would be 2 and 50 hundredths, or you could knock the 0 off at the end and make that 2 and 5 tenths. If you make it 2 5/10, we could write that as 2 5/10, and then that reduces to 2 1/2. We're going to look at a couple problems here in your workbook, page 85. Number 16, Mrs. Kingston's salary is 250% of what it was 20 years ago. She says her salary is 2.5 times what it was 20 years ago. Is she correct? And explain. So what we want to do, kind of the basic idea here, is that we want to see if these are equivalent or not. 250%, is that equivalent to 2 5/10 or not? So what we want to do here is really just get these in the same format. Probably the easiest way of doing that is getting the 250%, changing that to a decimal. So moving your decimal 2 places to the left, that would be 2 50 hundredths, 2.50. And then remember, with decimals, if we have zeros at the end, we don't have to keep them there. So that is the same as 2 5/10. So that means it's the same as 2.5 times what it was 20 years ago. So we look at number 17, the interest rate on a credit card increased by 0.5%. Is 0.5% less than, equal to, or greater than 5 thousandths? And explain. So this one, what we might want to do is the 0.5%, get that to a decimal of a percent. In other words, if I change 1/2 to a decimal, I'm still keeping the percent sign. What would that be? So that would be 0.5. Whoops. So 0.5 or 0.5%, that's still percent. And then we can think about changing that to a decimal. So at that point, we can then just move our decimal 2 places to the left. Only difference is we don't have a 0 in front of the decimal, which we can add there. Doesn't change anything. So these would be, it would be equal to on this part. And again, for explaining that, we would want to say, you know, if we changed a 0.5% to a decimal, we get 5 thousandths, which is the same as 5 thousandths. So we'll look at number 24. Lauren wants to open a savings account. Bank A will increase the interest rate on the savings account by 1/4% after the first year. Bank B offers an interest rate increase of 0.2% after the first year. So which bank has the higher interest rate increase? So we don't actually know what the interest rates were to start with, but they're asking which one has the higher increase. So probably what we want to do is if we can get these into the same format. So 1/4%. If I can get that to a decimal like the other one, that's probably going to be the easier thing. We could change the decimal to a fraction, but then remember we'd have to get common denominators, so that might be a little bit more work. So 1/4 as a decimal is 0.25. You might just know that because like a fourth of a dollar is 25 cents. If you don't know it, you can just divide it out, and that's what you'll end up getting. Okay, so that's 0.25%, or 25 hundredths of a percent. The other one is 2/10ths of a percent. And what we may want to remember is that we can add something after that too. So we can add a 0 after the 2 doesn't change it. And then so we're comparing basically 25 hundredths of a percent versus 20 hundredths of a percent. So then that means since this one's higher, that would be Bank A. Bank A would have the higher interest rate increase because 25 hundredths of a percent is greater than 20 hundredths of a percent.